So yeah, before I even kind of jump into the formal presentation here, I kind of wanted to share a couple of quick links so you can follow along as I speak. So I just dropped in a little bit about Make Caring Common. The website itself is the first URL that you see there. And then the second one will be for relationship mapping, which I'll talk about in a minute. So feel free to, as I said, kind of peruse those as I speak. The relationship mapping in particular might be helpful. Today I wanted to introduce our organization, Making Care in Common, and share a bit about our vision for ethical school leadership. We'll dive kind of right into our first strategy of relationship mapping, as I said, and I'll discuss how it can be used to first kind of get a sense of the relationships between students and adults, especially a sense of which students perhaps are connected to a caring adult in their school. Those who maybe need still a trusted adult in their school, and then helps educators follow up with those students and really start to build those relationships. And then, also just kind of want to spend a little bit of time speaking about our circle of concern if there's some time as well. This is a great exercise to help build both adult and student empathy muscles. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then, like I said off the top, we'll leave some time for questions, but again, feel free to jump in if those arise between now and then. So a little bit again about MCC. We use research and the expertise of both practitioners and parents to develop effective strategies for the most part, and that are meant to really promote in children a sense of caring, a commitment to the greater good, and the skills to do that. So we look to influence the national conversation about raising and educating caring, ethical children, and develop partnerships that enhance our work and elevate our message, just like this one today. Our vision really is a world in which young people learn how to treat each other well day to day, come to learn and seek justice and fairness in their communities and in their broader community, and hopefully maybe even do what is right, though it may be at a cost to themselves at times. And we think that young folks, people in general with these capacities, these abilities, will grow to be community members and citizens who can strengthen our democracy and hopefully heal some of the fractures that divide us. Ultimately, hopefully create a more caring and just world. MCC is a project at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and our faculty director, Rick Weisborg, has been a practicing developmental psychologist for a long time. He's also the sort of in charge of our human development program, which is a newly named program over at the HGSE, the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So, just under his leadership, we've really been able to grow and expand over the past few years to help a large number of schools. Over 200,000 students have been surveyed, and tens of thousands of students have come in contact with our work. So it's been a pleasure to be over at MCC, and would be a pleasure to help you in any way that we can. We know that, of course, without strong caring relationships between all members of school communities, I think that that's going to be administration, staff and faculty, families and students, but also all adults in the school building. It's going to be, without those strong relationships, it's going to be really difficult to affect any kind of meaningful change. It's going to be difficult to fight for justice and, again, kind of create that better world that we hope for. So we work with district and school leaders around the world. Many of them are in the US, but we do have partners around the world. And they help us gather data about school environments, and in particular, the sort of strength of relationships that exist inside of schools. And then we help them implement easy to use, targeted strategies that are meant to promote social, emotional, and ethical capacities, skills in young people, really motivate the adults in their lives and enable them to integrate these tools to develop the skills. We also develop action plans with schools for sort of continuous school improvement in the area of caring and ethical development. And then we offer opportunities for professional development, staff training. We'll also be holding an equity and justice leadership symposium coming up soon for school leaders who are interested in equity and justice in schools. So hope that you'll be in touch. Let me know. You can get in touch with me at any time at Caring Schools with an S, at makingcaringcommon.org if I can be any help regarding any of the things I just mentioned. So do feel free to get in touch with me, and I will remind you of that email address and our webpage later in the presentation. But for now, I'd like to just jump right into a couple of strategies, like I said, and share with you some tips for how you might use them. We know that, of course, there are going to be many difficulties in developing relationships right now. We also know that there's perhaps nothing more important in a child's life than a positive and stable relationship with a caring adult. So for students, that positive connection to at least one school adult, whether it's, again, a teacher, a counselor, sports coach, other staff member, can have really, really positive effects, really tremendous benefits that include things like reduced bullying, lower dropout rates, improved social and emotional capacities all around. So rather than leave these connections up to chance, relationship mapping, the strategy I'm about to share, really invests in time in making sure that every student is known by at least one adult. And then using the strategy, school staff can identify those folks who do not, again, have current positive connections to school adults. We do this during a private meeting. Those students are then paired with a supportive adult mentor within the school. Throughout the year, these mentors support each other. So there's a little bit of a cohort model that's built in. And then school administrators routinely communicate with staff as well to determine how well this process is actually going. And then at the end of the year, the staff convene one final time to talk about their efforts, the sort of positive impact that maybe they've had. Adults may also choose to pay sort of particular attention to at-risk students during this time, students that may be particularly vulnerable at this time. And then, follow up with them again, like I said, in the next year, if that seems necessary and appropriate. Perhaps even pull together a plan for the summertime if they want to try to maintain that connection. Circle of Concern is more like a standard set of lessons that's meant to be engaged with in classrooms. So I'll speak more about that strategy again if there is a little bit of extra time. It's a really good way to build the empathy muscle. We know that children and adults alike are predisposed to empathize with folks who are like them. This is going to really help them kind of push beyond that immediate circle of care and concern and include those who are different from them. The primary goal here, I really want you to walk away from the webinar with a sense of kind of how to implement the strategy. I want you to have a tool at the end of the day. And then, I also want to make sure that, you're able to do this with both strategies. So really getting a sense of those students who are perhaps in need of some connection and also helping those students who could use some additional support in building their empathy. Want to make sure that you have a tool to do both of those by the end of today, if at all possible. As I said a minute ago, there is, of course, going to be additional difficulty right now in creating relationships and making students really feel cared for and known as though they belong in a school community. I'm hearing from teachers all across the country that their work with students in this regard has been completely reset by the pandemic. And the work that they were doing before really is being taken pretty far back to the baseline in some cases, just trying to get students to engage, trying to get them simply online, participating at all. So as we consider students' abilities and sort of different set points and think about what each student needs right now, I think it's important to remember that for some kids, success might look like building and renewing or even just sustaining a connection to an adult. That might be where some students are right now. And so, of course, the difficulty is sort of that without good information about that, it's really about getting the information. We might not know whether or not a student is engaged and connected to at least one adult. Or perhaps if they've completely slipped through the cracks. So that's why we've kind of adapted the relationship mapping strategy to the virtual setting, in addition to the in-person setting. Now, more important than ever, of course, right? Then that we really identify these students and reach out and get our arms around them and start to care for them. So again, please feel free to look on in that relationship mapping strategy that I shared at the very beginning of our time together. It will help, I think, give you a sense as I walk through the next couple of steps give you a sense of the strategy itself, but there's a lot of information there. So I'll try and share just the most salient points right now. In advance of your first meeting, you're going to want to email your staff and faculty a sheet with a description and purpose of the activity itself. So I'd provide instructions within that email, or maybe even on a separate attached document. You're going to want to schedule an online meeting with the entire staff. That can be done in groups. It doesn't have to be just one whole group of people. You can do this by grade levels, for example. But we want to ask that all school adults attend at least one of these meetings. That's going to include coaches, support staff. I always say the janitorial staff are really important in this work. I always say the bus drivers are incredibly important in this work. Really, any adult that a student might have contact with, those folks could be the people keeping one or two or maybe more students from slipping through the cracks. So they should be involved. Ensure that the online document is therefore able to be accessed by everyone who's going to join this meeting. But at the same time, also ensure that there are sort of appropriate share settings on the sheet itself. And then take a look at the example sheet. I think I may not have shared that with you yet. So let me just go ahead and pop that into the chat as well. This sample sheet, for those of you who are on with us, will really give you a sense of what I mean when I say the mapping sheet. Okay, it's really a sheet where you're going to put every student's name in the entire school in a column on either side of that name. The words you use, I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but the words you use will be dependent on your school, sort of vocabulary that makes sense in your school. I'll get to that in a second, but for those of you following along, do take a look at that sample sheet. Make sure staff has kind of a clear understanding of the words, like I said, that you're using. So for either side of the student's name, you're going to have those two columns. For example, if you choose to use the word at risk on one side of the student's name on one column, you may want to let folks know what that means, and that it can include students who are just having a tough time, a little bit of trouble socially, academically, or in some other way. At risk may not be the word that you want to use, like I said, in your community, but whatever you use, it should be well understood. It should be a common word that people kind of understand, come to mean a student that we might want to connect with that might, need a little bit of additional support. Make sure that staff and faculty, of course, have sufficient time to spend doing this mapping. That could be in advance, or it could be during the first meeting. It may mean spreading the mapping over several days, or providing some online support for teachers while they're mapping if that's needed. So basically, we want to just, again, try to make sure that we get everybody's input on this sheet at some point. If possible, aggregate all of that data before holding the first big conversation. And once everyone's had a chance to complete that map, go ahead and ask folks to, if they can, just wait for the summary portion of the big first meeting before they start to analyze the list. This can, I think, help everyone. And that includes the facilitators, but this can help everyone focus on the conversation that they're having in that first meeting, and reviewing the results toward the end of that first big reflection meeting, I think can be a more effective way to go about it. So just a couple of quick tips. If you're going to go by grade level, make each grade level a separate tab in the sheet. Even if you're not going to be meeting by grade level, that could be helpful. Also you can incorporate this into obviously existing meetings. That is probably one of the best ways to do it, to make sure that you gather the greatest amount of information. Like we were saying at the very beginning, a lot of the students, this is a hard time to be sort of making connections with students. So many of the students who were at risk before the pandemic are going to be even more at risk now. We know that many students experience events like what's going on in terms of social unrest and social justice in this country, the pandemic, of course, and the related economic difficulty. We all kind of meet these things differently at different times and in different ways. So during that reflective meeting, school adults will hopefully have an opportunity to not only reflect on the importance of key relationships in their own lives, which I think is a practice that is worthwhile at any time, but it's also a time where they begin to link up with students who need their support. So in the first part of this big meeting that you're going to hold, the first big meeting, you're going to be doing some framing for about 15 to 20 minutes. If you don't want to talk about relationships, if that doesn't work for your school, another great resource to frame the conversation might be some research about positive relationships and the importance of them in students' lives. You can check out the Make a Caring Common website for more examples of that. I'm also happy to share additional research and tools that could be useful. So do check in afterward if that's helpful. We were thinking about the kinds of questions we might want folks to really be asking at that time. And I think things like, who were these relationships with? What made these relationships meaningful? Who were the students maybe that we have built strong relationships with? How did those relationships form? All of these are going to be helpful for us as we start to think through connecting with additional students. If people are willing to share some of their responses, that's great. It's always a good idea to, of course, thank them afterwards. The next part of that meeting will be a reflection portion, about 20 minutes for reflection. You're going to want to let folks analyze the list at this point. This is a chance for them to really kind of take a look at every student's name, who has marks for being at risk, who has marks for lots and lots of caring connections with adults in the school. What interesting or surprising details do you notice from this list after you've had a chance to look through it with everybody? What questions maybe does it evoke, or reflections does it bring up for you? So spend some time again talking about these with colleagues as well. And then the final portion of that first meeting is going to be action planning, where we take about 20 minutes to match students with staff. Small schools might want to match students who are, at risk, but then probably also students who maybe only have one caring connection. That could work. Much bigger schools might choose to only focus on those folks who have no caring connections and seem to be at risk in one way or another. So that's another possible way to sort of analyze and then follow up on the actual data you're getting back. If needed, you might want to assign a coupling based on matching interests or schedules for students, if that works. You want to think a little bit about what possible factors contribute to some students having maybe more check marks in one side of the sheet than others, and what kinds of school-wide changes might be able to be made. What individual changes in ourselves as practitioners, as teachers, as counselors, as coaches, what can we do as individuals, right? These are all questions that we hopefully will have some time to think about and talk about with colleagues. And then the sort of final step of this meeting is really to mark a reminder on the calendar, on the school calendar, also in our personal calendars, for 4 weeks after this first reflective meeting, and then again for 4 or 5 months after the first reflective meeting. And then we're going to want to mark that final date at the end of the year as well, to make sure that we're all checking back in. Okay, oh, there was a quick tip box here that I wanted to make sure you saw. Some folks have said that it was helpful to actually provide their staff and faculty with sentence stems. A lot of people have had questions about how to open these conversations. And so, if we're going to be doing this in school, it might make sense to provide some teachers with a little bit of support. It might be a full training for those who feel like they need it. Hopefully the people who step up and stand out are those who feel comfortable already. But I think it's perfectly okay to provide some training. It could even be a train the trainer model where folks who feel comfortable doing this, opening up conversations with students, building relationships, could provide support to those who maybe need a little bit of additional support in that area. That's totally fine. And so this, again, this follow-up sort of portion of relationship mapping, folks wonder how to begin these conversations. Ideally, staff, again, are matched with students because they have 1 or 2 things already connecting them. It could be that they've, staff or faculty member has taught a family member of this student, or they both like the same kind of music, something along those lines. If that's not the case, simply letting students know that these are obviously really trying times, hard times, that we want to make sure that students know that we're here that we're here to talk if they ever need us, if they're having any kind of problem, socially, academically, or otherwise. You may also want to let students, you may also want to ask students, that is, how they've been kind of feeling during the time of COVID, how they've been taking care of themselves, or maybe how they've been taking care of a family member or somebody else. It's often a great way into these conversations. If a school adult knows that a student has, for example, a particular passion in a given area, that can also be a great way in. Basically, we want to make sure that students don't feel overwhelmed by this attention, but feel supported. And so, again, we'll be following up 4 weeks after, and then again 4 months after that initial meeting. This is a great time to convene the staff members who have committed to reaching out to disconnected students. It creates a real sense of community for them. We ask questions like, was there a connection made? If not, what needs to be done? We can sort of come together and through sort of consultation with each other, come up with plans of action for difficulty and celebrate those moments that seem to be going really well. Bob, just want to check in on time. Do we feel like we have, how much more time do we have here for the presentation? I can keep going with circle of concern, or we can wrap it up.
Yeah, I think we should, if you could wrap it up, we could move to the panel, Glenn, and that'll give the panel about 20 minutes for Q&A, both about your presentation, about the work in general of MCC. That's
great. Okay. So if there are questions, please feel free to let me know. If you have questions about circle of concern, the other strategy I was going to share about, also happy to talk about that a little bit, and can share the link for that as well.
Okay, great, thanks. So panel, it's open to you. I actually could jump in because there's a variable here that I'm assuming it's kind of mentioned quickly, but I'm assuming it's fairly significant. And you know, and I've spent years in independent schools, and one of the central value propositions of an independent school is the relationships that are developed and that are nurtured, not only oftentimes across age groups, but surely with the adults in the building. I've also, and a lot of times in independent schools, they do this through the structure of what they call advisories or home times or whatever. But I've also heard over and over again that we don't have time to develop the relationships that we would like to, the depth of rapport that we would like to have with our students. So I'm wondering if any of the work that you're doing is in some way feeding back to school leadership, even governance, and not just independent schools, but public schools as well, because this is, you know, schools are in my mind overly focused on you know, GPAs and SATs and so on and so forth, and there is the talk of social emotional growth, but that surely is, it doesn't seem to me to be on the same plane of import as algebra. So how is it that we get to that point in schools where there's kind of a reframing of why really does this school exist, and are we creating what we need to within the culture of a school to actually develop these kinds of qualities and components of character that we're talking about?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that it comes from two different places, frankly, and it's a big part of why MCC operates the way we do. We're trying to have some impact on the conversation that parents and families have around things like GPA and college admissions, and kind of trying to take some of the excessive achievement pressure and take the air out of that a little bit. And so we're really trying to make sure that folks are activated, mobilized, motivated, and feel like they have the ability to ask the right questions of schools. So we provide parents tip sheets and questions that they should be asking of school leaders. At the same time, we think that this is an issue that really needs to come from the top too. We need ethical school leaders, folks who are kind of committed to caring and a commitment to justice, and are really they walk that talk. They live it. They promote it. They provide time and space in schools for adults to highlight this work, to integrate this work into classrooms, disciplines, advisories, sports programming. It should really sort of be a wraparound experience where students, hopefully, in the best case scenarios, walk out the door and the bus driver says hello to them and asks them a caring question as they step onto the bus. And as they walk into the school building, there's an administrator waiting there who knows their name, and they say hello as they come into the building. They see, the school motto, which reflects the same values that we're talking about here today. And then, head to class where they get some direct instruction in advisory about how to care for people that they don't know about. And that this is really sort of a wraparound experience. They head home and families are in conversation with them. They have a tool maybe from Making Caring Common that helps them capture caring moments each day or once a week. So, they're really kind of getting both instruction, practice, modeling from all around. This is how people, we think, learn to really treat each other well day to day. They need to see what it looks like. But leaders need to really believe in this. They need to see the fact that this is not an add-on, that creating a caring community where people feel as though they belong and that they can make a change, where they're taught how to care for one another, especially those who are maybe marginalized or different from them. That, this is really not, like I said, not an add-on. It's pretty much a necessary precondition for high academic achievement. It's a necessary precondition for a connected school where students do well and school adults come feeling like they want to engage with young people and teach them and learn alongside them and learn alongside each other. This is just as much about the relationships between staff and administration and staff as it is about staff and students or students and one another. So we really want to get good information about all of this, and we want to make sure that people feel like they're both motivated, they understand why this is important, but also have the tools to actually integrate the work, to do the work. So hopefully that went some distance toward answering your question, Bob, and if not, then let me know. I can always try to tack some additional info on there.
I have a follow-up to Bob's question, and I couldn't agree more on the importance of relationships. But our current educational system, I would say both public and independent schools, really is set up, it rewards and values high academic success. And it's really hard for those nice kids to say, you're a great, nice kid, and that's more important, or that's, better. So making that flip, and I would often think, I think that, being good and nice may come in second to high academics, where really, how do you make that flip where that really should be the priority and that the academics will follow? Certainly, try to tell a 16-year-old kid at a highly competitive school, it's okay that they're not the top of their class, but they're really nice, or that, they're a good, kind person. So I'm wondering if any of the schools that you're working with, are you seeing buy-in or, any sort of impact on the students?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. I integrated a lot of this work into the high school that I was teaching in, and I saw immediate results there. I wouldn't say that we saw the needle, completely flip in 1 year. But we had leadership who really believed in this and really did believe in the power of relationships. And so gave me a lot of leeway to fully integrate the work. We surveyed every student, staff, and many families in the school community. We got a sense of their experience of the school community, in terms of the degree to which they felt safe and connected, the extent to which they felt like bullying, harassment, teasing, those sorts of things were taking place, whether or not rules and expectations were well understood. Using that information, we then pulled together an action plan together with staff and faculty. It was really important that they had meaningful say in the action plan that we pulled together. But at the end of the day, it really was about school leadership. The folks at the top is sort of in the principal's office and the assistant principals supporting the work, believing in it, and then enabling us, the staff, to kind of really mold it and make it what we thought it needed to be in order to integrate it meaningfully, so students could, again, get the modeling that they needed, get the practice with the skills that they needed. To your point about the incentive piece, I think it's really, really important that young folks see what other students in their school actually care about. The belief is that students really care about academic success, and they do. And it's the belief of students that staff and faculty and families really care about success. But when we survey them, there may be 20, 30, up to 50% of a student population that actually chooses caring as their top priority over academic achievement, over, we ask them to rank a number of values when we survey them. So we ask them to rank caring, we ask them to rank academic achievement, and we ask them to rank their own happiness. It's fascinating information that comes back about the extent to which young people really do care about caring for others. It's also fascinating to see what parents most care about. 80% of parents think that raising a caring child is the most important thing, yet some large percentage, I want to say it might be an equivalent amount, about 80%, feel that other parents in the school community most value academic achievement. And so there's this actuality gap, there's sort of an ascription actuality gap is the sort of fancy term for it. We ascribe values to people that we don't hold. We could swear that we hold the right values. It's everybody else that has the wrong values. You hold up this information to people and it really can open their eyes to the actual true picture of the value structure of the school. And the fact that there are these sort of perhaps quieter minorities, sometimes even majorities, students, families, staff members who really do care about the right thing. That's one side of it. Getting good information about this is important, and then sharing that information in the right ways is a really helpful tool. The other thing I would say is really exposing young folks over and over and over again to some of the things Making Caring Common has been releasing in vis-a-vis Turning the Tide, our big reports about college admissions, and the extent to which college admissions offices are starting to change what they're looking for truly and meaningfully, to start to focus more on the kinds of things that are perhaps hard to quantify at times, but certainly which demonstrate and show what kind of person an applicant might be. These are things like a deep engagement with their academics, a deep engagement with their school community in a way that really shows that they're passionate about the, let's say, one or two or maybe three extra things that they're doing in school. They're not looking for these brag sheets that are pages and pages long. The fact that you've gone to other countries and done, support or relief work there. What we're really looking for is a meaningful engagement in your community and making, tackling a real problem and working with as opposed to for the people who are receiving some of that support. Those are the kinds of things that schools are looking for. We've got folks signed on to our open letter. So do take a look at the Turning the Tide report or Turning the Tide 2. We have signatures from most of I think all of the Ivy Leagues and over 150 sort of tier 1 and tier 2 colleges that say, definitively, this is what we're looking for. We're not looking for what you probably think we're looking for. So exposing young folks to this, spending time with families. I think families drive a lot of that pressure that we're describing. And so, kind of, again, really showing them the data that comes back both from their school community and the data that's coming back from college admissions offices about who's getting in and what it is that admissions offices are looking for can together go a long way toward kind of, again, reducing some of the academic achievement pressure, resetting expectations for ourselves, for each other, and, hopefully things like signing open contracts with families and students about, how we're going to behave, what it is that we're going to be focused on, how we're going to treat each other and take care of each other can also go a really long way. That's an easy lift idea. But again, I think it has to come from, getting good information, sharing that information regularly, creating opportunities for people to be in conversation with each other about what's actually important to them.
Glenn, can you maybe share some examples of schools that have kind of gone above and beyond to share with parents the day-to-day interactions that children are having, in which caring is like the number one priority for the school? I often think about how parents only have access to children's grades. So if that's what they're caring about, it's because it's all they're seeing. And so I'm wondering, in my work at a school, where do we find time to share the stories of a kid helping another kid through a tough day? And I'm just, curious if you've seen any schools do this effectively. Obviously, newsletters often go to people's spam folders. So is it the individual email to parents? Is it town forums where you're highlighting kids' successes as they're caring for others? But I'm wondering what schools are doing that this is successful in.
Yeah, it's a great question, Anna. Thank you. And also, hello. So, yeah, we've got schools doing all kinds of different things. I won't mention any names in particular, but we do have a school that is using blast text messaging to good effect. We also have schools that have decided to do like a 5-to-1 communication ratio and make sure that for every sort of one time they might write home about a student, they are also sharing 5 pieces of information about things that are going well, just to maintain a really positive, open line of communication with families long before they may need to send home some kind of piece of information about behavior or academics or something along those lines. So really starting early in the beginning of the year, maybe even before the school year starts, with a quick note home. The other thing that I've seen work really well is integrating the kinds of comments into report cards that we want to focus on. So as opposed to just, is disruptive in class or something along those lines, the kind of qualitative feedback that we can be giving parents about students can include things about their social, emotional, and ethical development. And so that's yet another way to let them know that students are doing well. And again, this sort of positive communication piece, a major finding, sort of been sustained over time, is just the importance of communication with families in building trust. So being in open communication with them often is really helpful. So we also suggest to staff, teachers in particular, if they can write home, this is a 2-sentence, 3-sentence letter. So I used to have a case of 125 students. It would be almost impossible for me to write a personal letter for all of them at the same time. But over the course of the year, I would make sure I was trying to do that. So that's yet another tool. Everything that Making Caring Common is going to suggest will be very low lift and evidence-based. So again, things like having a faculty member standing at the door as opposed to inside the school building will really promote folks, family members coming up and saying hello, as opposed to having to make their way into the school building. We found that can have a pretty dramatic impact on the communication between schools and homes. Other ways that I'm trying to think of other schools that have done a really good job communicating with parents. Well, many schools that we've worked with and sort of through our direction have made sure to include on their leadership team folks from the PTO, at least 1 or 2 members on their kind of, whether or not it's their leadership team or at least their kind of Making Caring Common team, whatever nucleic group of individuals is responsible for driving the work, ensuring that there's 1 family member or 2 on that team and that they're getting regular communications. Hopefully they're a member of the, some kind of PTO or something where they can then be sharing that same information pretty regularly, has been a great way to keep families engaged and in contact. The other really important piece is gathering good contact information from them from the start. And so I know that this will only be probably pertinent for some school leaders, but In some cases, schools are only at this point operating as places for people to come and pick up food or other kinds of resources and materials. And so we're saying, make sure you're getting contact information at those points every time a family member comes into the building, because their situation may have changed, their location may have changed, their email address may have changed, depending on the school population you're working with. And so that's yet another way that I've heard of schools ensuring that they have good communication with families, is that they have the right contact information. A lot of schools have moved to text now because that is where people seem to actually respond. But that has to be done sparingly, I think, and really thoughtfully. You can't be texting people very often. Trying to think of other good examples. There are, of course, other examples of schools that do kind of regular family included cultural events. Those are often really great for generating a sense of community, sharing information about different kinds of students and student experiences, and connecting families with adults. Back to school night is, of course, a tried and true go-to. It's something that my school actually did very, very well. And so I'd be happy to kind of share how we did that offline, if that's helpful for anybody. Yeah, but you're right about the newsletter piece. You do have to be thoughtful about like meeting sort of families where they exist, so to speak. In many cases, for some schools, that's the LMS that they're using. In other cases, it might be an email home. But those tend to be, you're only catching the folks who you're always going to make sure you catch in those instances. So it's kind of being thoughtful about, where is it that we're going to come in contact with families who aren't engaging. And that's why I mentioned the services piece. If students are coming, if families are coming to a school to pick up either resources or food or other kinds of materials, clothes, things like that, that could be a good place to get their information and share information. Leon, I'm not sure if that was helpful for you. We can always, of course, talk offline as well about VMS, but let me know if that's helpful.
I'd love to ask a question about the adults in the building. I'm a journalist and I've written a lot about social emotional learning. And so I've had the chance to interview a lot of school leaders and educators about this relationship work that they do. And one thing that comes up over and over again is that the adults in the building need the social emotional work as much as the students do. And I'm thinking about right now, how overloaded teachers are with virtual learning and how they're all at the breaking point. Can you talk a little bit about what school leaders can do to do that? Because it does, talk about modeling. I think it does trickle down, it's like when your relationships are all tight, then that trickles down. The students see that.
It's true.
No, Glenn, where I have once again in my life successfully run a session over time, but that is so critical. I was wondering if we're going to get there. Bill, what's a way can this be done offline?